Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Qdabra Weekly Webinar. My name's Hillary, and I'm a developer here with Qdabra, and I am super happy to be here with everyone. I see we have quite a few familiar names in the attendees. It's super great to see everybody here. And today we're going to talk about XPath. And I've talked about XPath before, so for some of you, this will be things you've heard before. For some of you, it's going to be new, maybe a little bit of a refresher. So my title, "Why Your XPath Doesn't Work," is it's a little flippant because guess what? A lot of times mine doesn't either. It's one of those things that we use in InfoPath, and it is a key to understanding how to work with XML and InfoPath. But because InfoPath does such a great job of kind of protecting us from the realities of XPath, I think a lot of times it's possible for us to kind of stumble around, without really getting any kind of deep understanding of what we're doing. And that's okay. But at the same point in time, it means that when we get stuck, it can be hard to get unstuck, or things are mysterious or confusing that don't have to be. So that is why I wanted to talk again about XPath. Some of it is just, in the forum, I see the same kinds of questions again and again that come down to, I'm not really sure what my data looks like, and I'm not really sure what I have to do to get back the right data. So it just seems always relevant as long as we're talking about XML. So, what is XPath anyway? Well, I think we should go ahead and do a quick poll. So I set up a poll on this, and let's see if I can launch it correctly here. I'm going to launch this poll. I'm going to give everybody just a minute or two to go ahead and take the poll. So we're trying to figure out what XPath is here. Well, so far everybody feels that it's the thing that makes you cry on Tuesday. Oh, the thing that keeps you up till 2 a.m. Right? So it is one of those things that just, I think for a lot of us, turns into oh, like I said, a bit more of a mystery than it needs to be. I'm going to go ahead and just close this and move on here. So seriously, what is XPath? And this is the Wikipedia definition, which is sometimes helpful for people, sometimes not. It's a query language, right? It's how we select what we want back from an XML document. So we take some XML, and XPath is how we get back the data we need. It also can be used for computing values. You guys have all used the function editor in InfoPath. All of those different little functions in there, like substring and so forth. Those are XPath functions. And so we can use these functions to act upon these nodes in our XML. But most of what we're doing in InfoPath, where I see people struggle, where I personally struggle, doesn't have to do so much with the function library as it has to do with the query feature, getting back the right data, checking for the right data. Now, everybody understands things differently. We all have different ways to think about things that help them make sense to us. So the things that help XPath make sense to me may not be the thing that helps it make sense to you, but it might help you start exploring what will make it make sense to you. I think the things that helped me come to a better understanding of XPath was thinking of it like a SQL query, because I've worked with SQL quite a bit, and I've done a lot of where clauses, or joins or so forth, and so when I don't have any problem in SQL writing a where query to, writing a where clause to get back exactly the row I need. So why am I struggling so much with adding a filter to an XPath to get back the node I need? And when I started thinking of it as a query language, it became simpler for me to understand it. The other thing that was helpful for me was when I thought of it in terms of Excel. Like, we deal with data a lot in Excel. We look at a large Excel file. And at the top of your Excel table, you might have filters, and you drop a filter on. You say, oh, I want everything where name is Hillary, and I want everything where date is greater than, XYZ. And although that's not a real date, but we all knew that. So thinking of it that way, or thinking of it like a VLOOKUP in Excel, where I want this item that matches this item on another field. Those are inexact and kind of inelegant metaphors, but they helped me kind of come to better terms with what I was trying to do with XPath. And I think understanding what we're trying to do is half the battle. At least the query piece of XPath is all about how do we specify what node we want. And sometimes no node's returned, and that also is valuable information. So I'm trying to encourage you to think about what else you work with successfully that you use to determine a specific thing you want, and see if there's a way you can relate that to XPath to help make it more approachable for you, less of a black box. In InfoPath, our main uses for XPath are generally, selecting a filtered value from a repeating node, right? I've got all this data from my SharePoint list, and when somebody selects something in my main data source in this dropdown, then I want to be able to set another field, right? So we use it in dropdowns for filters. We use it for setting values. We use it in calculations and formulas, of course, and we use it in conditions for various types of rules. So given a secondary data source that looks like this information, this is this is kind of a handy little XML file I use for secondary data sources a lot for demo purposes, because it's kind of a nice little data set. It's got some nice features to it, and it's a quote unquote nutrition data set, and it's got these different items in it with different manufacturers. So if I look at this data, and I know I want the truffles. I mean, of course I want the truffles. Who doesn't? What are the questions I need to ask myself to figure out what the filter should be? I mean, just looking at this sample data, I can see that the name is distinct in all of these. So it could be that filtering just on name would be enough. I would assume that manufacturer is not necessarily going to be unique, but because I could have multiple items produced by the same manufacturer, especially if this is just a small subset of the eventual data. But I bet if I combine name plus manufacturer, I would be pretty consistently getting back one row and just the row I wanted, right? Because the likelihood of one manufacturer producing two items with the exact same name, that strikes me as logically pretty slim. Does it mean this is foolproof? No. I mean, I could have a manufacturer that decided to make three things with the exact same name. But in general, that's the kind of analysis I like to do on a data set to determine how do I know which one is unique. Now, sometimes you've got it easy, right? Because you've got a drop down, it's associated with an ID, and the ID is unique. For example, looking at my secondary data source here, this has an ID. So if in my form itself, I had a little drop down, the user picked the name of an item, then I could leverage that ID. I would use the name for the display in the drop down and the ID for the value, and then I could leverage that ID that I know is unique. But if I didn't have something like that, and all I had was, just a baseline analysis of the data to try to figure out what I wanted back, I think name and manufacturer would probably be a pretty good way to go. So here is the XPath that we would use in InfoPath to get back our dark chocolate truffles for this manufacturer, right? So we've got nutrition, food, and then we've got our filter. Everything in our square brackets, that's our filter. So this first little bit, XD document get DOM nutrition, that is basically saying, get me the secondary data source named nutrition. Now, if we were inquiring about the main data source, it would be xd document get-dom. I'll show you a little trick in InfoPath to figure this out, because I tend to forget that get-dom and get-dom, and sometimes it's handy to be able to select the full XPath to a node in a place where InfoPath is going to want to use a relative path instead of an absolute. Nutrition/food, right? That's just, hey, get me a food node. If we're going to pop back here again. That's just the direct XPath nutrition food right down the tree there. And then we're saying, I want the food node where the name is equal to Truffles Dark Chocolate and the manufacturer is Linden's. Now, you guys all know by now, XPath is case sensitive. So, I can't have a capital N here. I can't have a lowercase t here. And that is some of the places where I see people run into a little trouble is with things like case sensitivity and namespace prefixes. Now, this data doesn't have any namespaces in it, so I have no namespace prefixes on this secondary data source. But a lot of times when I see somebody having worked out an XPath by hand, for example, instead of using InfoPath, the thing I often see missing is namespace prefixes. The good news is in InfoPath, I think it's 2007 and greater. I know 2010 and 2013 and 2007 users, forgive me, it's just been a while since I've used it. But you can right-click a node and you can select Copy XPath. Go paste it in a text editor, and then you can quickly see, if there are namespace prefixes on your data. Okay, so here we have the basic XPath that we would use. And so if we're still looking at the same data source, what would the XPath be to get the total fat for those chocolate truffles? So if we look here at this data source task pane, we can see what our total fat node looks like there. We already know the XPath to get the food. And so I want you to look at these different XPaths and figure out which one will get you back the total fat. And now, because I just popped this on you, I'm going to go back one and show you this data source again. So here's our data source again. And here are the XPaths. I'm going to give everybody a minute to take a look at these. And then I'm going to run a quick poll, and we're going to see if you can pick the right XPath to get this. Now, I apologize because in the poll, I couldn't put these XPaths because they're too long for the character limit. So you have to pick your letter, know which one you're going to pick, and I'm going to go ahead and launch the poll, and you pick the XPath that you know would have gotten you that total fat. Yeah, so far you guys are pretty much rock stars. So we're going to give this another couple seconds just in case anybody else wants to vote. What I'm seeing here is I'm seeing a split between two values, and that's great because there is indeed two options here. I went ahead and closed that, and I'm going to make sure we're still up. There's two options here that are effectively the same, right? B and D. So B is this one up here where we have the filter. Whoops. Thank you, PowerPoint. I will not click again. Where we have the filter on food. So the top bullet there was B, and you can see our filter inside our square brackets is on food. And then it's followed up with the total fat node, which, that's the spelling, and it had the hyphen in it. Okay, but you can see the second option that was also right was D, where we put the filter after total fat. So there were two places we could put our filter. Both of them were fine. We could put them on food, or we could put them on the total fat node. Now the difference you're going to see here, and here's my little screenshot from InfoPath where I used the same method in both. I'll show you that in my form. And you can see down here that the total fat is indeed 19 something. I don't know what. I don't want to know. and so at any rate, this is just a slight change between the two. And you can see here, with total fat, we have to go back up the tree to get back to the name node for that particular food node. So we go ... that takes us back to food, at which point we can select name. And the same with manufacturer. So that's the difference, is we've got this additional access in our XPath to get back to the correct node for that, the correct name node for that food node and manufacturer. So relative versus absolute XPath, again, this is an explanation that works for me. If the metaphor doesn't work for you, that's okay. I encourage you to explore one that does. But what works for me is I think about absolute XPath as being like Latin long. It's a spot on the map. It's the grocery store. It's the library. The library doesn't move. The grocery store doesn't move. They're just these spots on the map. And so an absolute XPath is that one and that one and that one. A relative XPath is driving directions. I'm at the library. How do I get to the store? We're going to go back here. I'm at the total fat node. How do I get to the name node for the same food? How do I get to the name node for the preceding food or the following food? How do I get to the name node for the food that is not truffles? Right? Those are all relative XPaths. They all involve navigating around in the same general area from one node to another. So if we take a quick look here at our XPaths again, the XPath to food is absolute. We're going to nutrition food. From food, we're going to name or manufacturer, and it's going to be within that same food. So that's going to be relative to food, of course. And if we go to total fat, then again, name and manufacturer, these are relative to total fat at this point. And that's why we see the slight difference in the filter. And that is one of the things I do see is people confused when they move a filter why it's not working. They're trying to write some XPath by hand. They copied the filter from a different XPath that they created using the formula editor and InfoPath. And now all of a sudden they're like, well, it doesn't work. I'm getting this error in the function editor. It's like, well, yes, because it's wrong. And and the reason it's wrong is because it's no longer the correct path to the node you're trying to find. So those are just some things to kind of consider as you're working with XPath. So I want to mention a couple of cool little tools, and I'm going to show these to you here in a second in our demo. One is an online XPath tester. It's helpful to me. Sometimes it's helpful to me to kind of break out of InfoPath and go paste my XML someplace and just kind of play around in a window and figure out what I'm getting back. It's a good place to sort of enhance your skills, get a better sense of what you're able to select from where, and it's useful. W3 schools, hit and miss stuff. Some people have really strong opinions about them, but in general, they've got some good XPath examples that can kind of help you get your head around it if you need it. And then there's this little tool I ran across the other day that I downloaded. I'll show it to you. I thought it was kind of neat and helpful. And then of course, InfoPath itself is useful in these cases. So we'll hop into a demo here. I have to figure out how to. You guys must really just love how I struggle with things like PowerPoint and recording presentations. It must engender a lot of faith. It's like, oh, wow, she has trouble using PowerPoint, but it's not something I use a lot. So let's take a quick look at a sample form here. I'm going to have to drop it down a little bit in size because I changed my screen resolution. So let's see here. I've got view 1. I've got view 1 fixed, view 2. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and hit this in preview here in just a second. So right here, I've got an order picker that's going to let me pick an order from this data down here. This is a REST web service, and I just looked around online till I found something that was kind of publicly available. So when you get the samples for this webinar, you'll be able to preview it. I was just looking for some data source that was publicly available. And here's an order date, and here's my table. And I've added rules here to highlight for customer. So if the customer ID down here is equal to my order picker there, then I'm going to highlight this row in yellow. And for date, if the order date here is equal to the date there, then I'm going to highlight in green. And I'll go ahead and give you a heads up that my first view here is broken. And so we're going to preview this. We're going to see it not work. Okay, now just so you guys know, when you get this sample, it's going to ask about connecting to this data source, and you're going to say yes or no. I mean, you can say no if you want. And then it pops up asking for a credential, but you should just be able to cancel out of it. Like I said, it was a publicly available a little REST service, and I just wanted to have something that was a secondary data source. So, we can scroll down, we can see we've got data returned here. Now my first one was on customer ID. It's supposed to highlight as yellow. And so I'm going to select something. You can see he's here, he's not highlighting. I'm going to enter an order date, let's see, 1998-05-06, and tab out. Right, and you can see we've got orders, but those aren't being highlighted either. So we need to figure out what I've got going wrong here. And if we go and look, this is a common thing I see, especially in the forum. I've said to highlight it if the customer ID is equal to the order picker. And the order picker here is in my main data source, right? It's this guy. So what have I got wrong? Well, the most common thing I see that people have wrong is right here. My value is not the customer ID. My value is the actual ID node. So I would either need to change this so that the value was the customer ID, or I would need to change my highlighting rule so that it was highlighting based on ID matching order picker instead of customer ID matching order picker. The other place I have a mistake is on highlight for date. I'm saying where order date is equal to date picker. But the problem there is that what we see is not exactly what we have. So what we see here, these look the same, right? But it's not exactly what we have. So let's go look at my little fixed view here. And you can see my customer is highlighted. Whoops, let me select a customer again here. Right? So my customer is highlighted now, and my order date is highlighted too. So what did I do to fix these? Well, in my fixed view, what I did is I changed this to now contain customer ID for the value, right? So now I'm comparing like things. So now in my highlighting, when I say customer ID is equal to order picker, I'm comparing like things. This is a customer ID now. Now, if I had not been able to understand why things weren't working, I'll show you some troubleshooting things here. And then for my date picker rule, I changed it to substring before. Let's take a look at this one. Substring before order date T is equal to, there's my main data source, date picker. Now, the reason I had to change that to a substring before formula in this case is because my order date is actually a date time, right? And this guy is just a date. And I can tell that because I can look here under the properties. Okay, so I'm going to close this, and I want to show you a few little things that I could have done here to troubleshoot. And these are the kinds of things I suggest to people a lot in the forum that they try to do for troubleshooting. And I know sometimes when you've worked hard on the UI for your form, there's sort of a hurdle to just adding a bunch of junk on there for troubleshooting, but just put another view in that you can delete later, or just add controls down here at the bottom or something. You know, just don't. I would encourage you not to get too hung up on, but my form looks pretty, you know, and instead let's go and look at what the data really looks like. So here's my order picker. Actually, you know what, guys, I'm going to do this on the other view. So here's my I'm going to do it on my broken view. Here's my order picker, right? And the other thing I'm curious about is this order date. So I'm just going to copy that because I don't know what the value is. We're pretending here. And I'm going to change the formatting on that, right? And format, I'm going to say display the XML value, okay? And so that way, hopefully, I'm going to get back just the XML value, display the XML value. We'll do that, right? And now I've got just the XML value instead of the pretty formatted thing. And let's find out what my value is here too, so I can see why stuff isn't matching. And again, he throws a date picker on for me, and I'm just going to change that to a text box. And I'm going to change that to just show me the XML value. I'm going to go ahead and hit date. Whoops, I just changed the data type. That was great, wasn't it? I think I'll change that back. That wasn't what I meant to do. Display the XML value. Now, the other way you can see the XML value is you can save your form after you fill it out and just look at the XML itself. But this, you know, gives you a chance to kind of see what your data really looks like, and that can really help you troubleshoot these things. And this is a simplistic example, but at the same point in time, it's the same sort of logic that applies always. Okay, so first off, look at the date right here. So here's what the order date actually looks like. That's what the data looks like. And so my formatted data that's showing 5/6/1998, that's obviously completely -05/06. That's obviously completely different from what my date picker value is. So here's the value of my date picker, and here's the actual values in my orders. So you can see right away why I'm not getting things highlighted. They just don't match, right? And so up here, I'm going to go ahead and select a customer, and I'm going to select this same guy again. And we're going to scroll down, and we're going to see why it doesn't match. Well, my formatting was when order picker is equal to customer ID. These are my customer IDs. And it's visibly obvious that this does not match anything. And so those are the kinds of things that can help you start troubleshooting. Don't look at the value you see in the dropdown and assume that that's the value that's being stored. You know, throw a field on the form so you can see it. Don't look at the value that's being displayed in something that's been formatted, like a date picker or calculated value, and assume that's the actual value. Get it on the form, excuse me, get it on the form so you can actually see what the real value is, and it'll quickly become apparent to you, why things weren't highlighting there. Whereas over here, I created an XPath that gave me what I needed to be able to actually highlight for date. Now, to create this XPath, right, I actually wrote it by hand. But you would not have to write it by hand. You could do something like this. I just leave whatever. I am a very lazy woman. I just leave whatever defaults in that first box because I don't care about it. All I care about is using the formula editor to figure out my formula. So I'm going to insert a function. It's going to be text. I know what I need. I need the substring before the T. And so I'm going to insert my field or group, and it was under order. It was order date, right? And it needs to be before the T. Whoops, that's a capital. And what I care about is whether that is equal to, let's insert my main data source, date picker. Okay, so now I've got my expression right there, right? I know that's the expression I want. Now it's going to be a little wonky when I say okay here, but we're just going to clean it up manually. Now edit XPath to take a look at it. So you can see if you needed to manually create this someplace else, you could use this to help you, because now you've got this XDX document get DOM that gets you the main data source, right? You've got your formula, you know it works, right? You've been able to check it. So we're just going to say okay, and now we're going to change this first dropdown to the expression. Now, I know that customer order is equal to, that the expression is dot equals blank. So by using that formula editor to create my formula back there, I can just go ahead and get rid of that, right? And I can go delete. I'll go ahead and delete that one that I created earlier. And you can see it's got a little bit of extra parentheses in here. I'm not too concerned about it. You can clean them up if you want. I'm going to bet you that InfoPath cleans them up here in just a second. So it did. After I saved it, it cleaned off those extra parentheses. So I wasn't too worried about them. I tend to use parentheses like sugar in my tea. I like lots of them. They make me feel comfortable. InfoPath takes out the ones it doesn't need. So maybe if you're more secure in your skills of logic and math, you will not need as many parentheses as I do. But at any rate, you can change that first drop down to the expression at any time. And that lets you then use the formula editor to kind of develop your formula. As long as this is going to evaluate to true or false, right, then you're just fine. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of other little things here. I'm probably keeping you guys past our time limit, but I always do that. I guess everybody's used to it by now. Here was that second view of the little nutrition thing where I added the XPaths about getting the total fat. We'll just take a quick look at those guys. So here we've got these two expressions, and you can see that this was the one with the filter after food. We added XPath to see the whole thing. And this was the one with the filter after total fat. Now, if you're ever wondering how XPaths change depending on where something is located, you can do things like create calculated values and then paste them into a section that's bound to something else, or into a repeating table that's bound to something else. And you can see how InfoPath edits that calculated value in terms of what it does to the XPath. Generally speaking, it does it right. So as long as the value is still returning what you'd anticipate in preview, you can copy calculated values around to sort of give you a better sense of what the correct XPath that you're looking for is going to be in a certain scenario. So that's another little thing I do. You just want to make sure it's in the section that's bound to the same place you intend to use your eventual XPath expression. So if you were trying to come up with if you were trying to come up with the correct conditional format for something here in the repeating food group, then you would want to make sure that you put your calculated value that you're using to work out your expression here in the repeating food group, right? And so if we look at our calculated value properties now, I think this is going to still use the full XPath, which sometimes you actually want that in a repeating section, because let's just say for whatever reason you wanted to show the total count of truffles in every single row in your repeating table. You wouldn't want this to be relative to the row, or you would not get back the total count. You'd only get anything related to the current food row. I'm going to cancel out of there and move on to my not versus not equal. Has anybody run into trouble with not versus not equal? And let me show you the formulas there. Okay, so here's a not formula. And I'm saying if there does not exist an item in my nutrition data source, a food item, where the name is equal to my food picker up here and pick an item. So that's what I want to know. I want to know if there is nothing that is the same. Okay, and so that's my not formula. And then here's a not equals formula. What I want to know here is if the food picker is not equal to nutrition food / name. I bet some of you know what's going to happen here. And let's look at it in preview. So we've looked at this nutrition data source. Just so you guys know, chocolate chip cookies exist, lemon pie and vanilla ice cream do not. So if I hit vanilla ice cream, it is not equal and it does not exist. Okay, but chocolate chip cookies does exist. And look at that. Not, I get back a false, which is, sorry about the double and triple negatives. I'm getting back false because chocolate chip cookies does exist in my nutrition data source. But with not equal, I'm still getting back true, that it is not equal. And that is because of the fact that what's happening here is the XPath is only evaluating for, whoops, I do hope I didn't do something too stupid. Okay, the XPath is only evaluating for the first item, for the first food item. And so that not equal is giving me a different result than I would expect. If my question had been, is my food picker not equal to the first item in the food data source, then not equal would have been returning the answer I expected. But it wasn't. I was looking to see if it existed in the data source at all. And in that case, you would want to use not instead of not equal. Okay, so that's another place that I see confusion. And finally, I lost my, I got back into PowerPoint somehow. And finally, let's take a quick look at current. Does everybody feel comfortable with current? So current is the location I am currently at, where I currently am. And in InfoPath, that would mean the node I'm currently on. So here, this expression box is currently inside this repeating group, okay, customer order. So this expression box is inside this repeating group. So if we go look at this expression box, yeah, food that matches employee. So what I did was I realized employee IDs were numbers that matched up with the IDs in my nutrition data source. So, you know, this is about as made up as things could get. But what I'm saying here in this XPath is get me the food name where the ID of this food, right? So ID is relative to food, is equal to my current, so this current customer order repeating table row that I'm in, employee ID. So current in this case refers to the current location of my calculated value, and that happens to be this repeating customer order row. Okay, and so current is the place I currently am, and that's what allows me to get something from a data source other than the one where I'm trying to return a value. So we'll just cancel out of that. One thing I've noticed in InfoPath with complex expressions, if you're using any complex expressions that involve current and preceding sibling, and you change your main data source, sometimes I've seen current get wiped out. So if you have, I mean, the current function just disappears from the formula. So if you have a form that's been working, you make a little change to the data source and all of a sudden a bunch of things seem funky, that's something to go look for. You can see we don't have anything for ID3 in the nutrition file, but otherwise this is just based on the ID. One returns avocado dip in every case, right, and so forth. So kind of a silly example, but it at least sort of gets the point across of current. So let me find that XPath tester I mentioned. I do want to show you that. So here's an online XPath tester. It's, I think, super useful. I'm just going to go ahead and copy out this, and we'll use nutrition. But you could copy XML from an XML file if you needed to. There's space here if you need to define any namespaces if they don't happen to be in your XPath. So here's my XML, and I can just put in an XPath, you know, like the ones we've been working with. I could just say I want nutrition, food, you know, ID equals 2. Right, and test it. Ta-da! There's my food with ID equals 2. So it's not a complex tool. You know, it's not a real high tech tool, but it's useful if you're trying to get a sense of, you know, how do I get a particular item from this XML, and so you can use it that way and just kind of get a sense for what you're looking for that way. The other one that I grabbed the other day, and I do not remember where I put it. I installed this little program that also does that also does XPath. Let me pop. There it is. So it was XPath Visualizer. Let's see if I can find that real quick, because I did want to show you guys that. Sorry, I should have made sure I could find it before this. Yay! Well, thank heavens for search, right? Okay. Oh, it remembered my stuff. Now this guy, I think it was, yeah. So to get a new tab there, you have to hit Control N. So a little funky. Whoops! I don't have my whole XML. So if you are working with an XML that is a secondary data source, and you maybe don't know for sure what the structure is, maybe let's say it's coming from a web source. Another tool you can also use, so I'm just going to go ahead and run this. Another tool you can also use is Fiddler. If you're not familiar with Fiddler, you can run that when a web query runs, and that will help you see what the XML looks like that's being returned from your data source, and then you can copy it out and paste it into Notepad or paste it into one of these tools so that you can mess around with it. But again, you know, here we've got the XPath expression, and we're finding, you know, the right node. I am trying to think if there's another interesting XPath I could try, but I think I'm going to let that go. But at any rate, it's a freebie. It's on CodePlex, and if you want to try it, I would encourage you to. It seemed like a nice little visualizer, especially if you had a data set where there were multiple things returned by GoodPath. You can see there's a little thing here that lets you kind of scroll through the nodes and so forth. So again, and InfoPath is a great tool because you can you know, just set up pretend rules. I do that all the time. I go and pretend like I'm going to add conditional formatting to something just to work out the expression that I need for something else. So you can set up pretend rules, set up a debug view, and just kind of leverage that first drop down to the expression, or leverage the formula editor where you could click Edit XPath to really start looking at what the different values are. It looks harder than it is, you know, and like I said, InfoPath protects you to a certain level from any complexity, and that's great. And 99% of the time, that's good enough. But when you get stuck, it's really useful to have a better sense of what's going on behind the scenes. It's good to have a better sense of how this query language works, because then you can get yourself unstuck. Then you know some things like, oh, I'm trying to ask for something that doesn't really exist, because I have not found an instance where I have the XPath right and I'm not getting back the data. I haven't seen XPath failing. I've failed, right? I've gotten it wrong a lot of times. But the XPath, it's not like it's not returning the answer and the XPath is perfect and the XML is what I expect. You can definitely figure this out, right? You guys have figured out how to build forms. You guys have figured out how to create secondary data connections. You guys have figured out all this other weirdness about InfoPath. So don't psych yourself out. Don't look at it and be like, I don't know what this means. Just break it down. Just break it down into pieces. And if you don't understand the pieces, look at a smaller piece. Figure out what you need to get back. What are the right criteria? What are the questions you need to be asking? What's the valid data given your current sample? You can't plan for every single piece of data that's ever going to be thrown at you, but you can look at your current sample set and get a pretty good sense of what the data is going to look like. You're familiar with data. You've been building forms. You know what data looks like. Okay, so I just really want to encourage you to kind of look more closely at XPath, take things apart, ask the right questions of yourself and of your data, drag stuff onto your form, make a mess, drag secondary data sources on your form in preview, drag query fields on your form in preview. Use all the tools you've got in your box. Like one thing I've done recently was I've got this button that hides under certain conditions and I could not figure out what condition was wrong. So instead of hiding it, I changed it different colors so I could see which condition was failing. These are the kinds of simple things that it's easy to overlook. So don't let my form is finished keep you from, getting a little creative to figure out what's not working right. So I just want to encourage you to kind of dig in a little bit further and get a sense of what's going on behind the scenes there. We've got more webinars coming up soon. It looks like we don't have everything that's coming up soon here because I'm pretty sure we're going to have something on the 28th and so forth, but keep an eye on our site. And as you know, these kind of fill in as we go along. If anybody has any questions, now would definitely be the time. Feel free to fire away in the question editor. And I'm not seeing anything. There's going to be a survey that pops up after this, and one of the things I've asked is, so is there anything you'd like us to talk about in upcoming webinars? Because I think sometimes it would be really useful to get more ideas from our audience in general. I know a lot of you folks attend regularly, and it would be great to have some more ideas from you as to what would be helpful to you. And so in specific, I mean, not to not to be greedy here, but in specific, if there's something you'd like me to provide more information on, something I've talked about in the forum, something that's come up in a previous webinar, definitely, pop some suggestions my way because I'm always looking for ideas for these. So that's it. I am going to wrap up, let everybody go back to their busy days. Fill out the survey. I've got this sample form for you, my handy dandy nutrition data source, and the slide deck, of course. Enjoy the spring weather. At least I think it's probably spring where almost everybody is. If anybody's in Australia and heading into winter, well, I guess you had spring when we had fall. So have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much for attending.